At one level, it would be rather strange if the Church opposed globalisation. After all, she considers herself to be the universal Church. Would it not be strange if she wished to put political constraints on people conducting businesses and commerce across the world? The Victorian historian Lord Macaulay conceded that the spiritual force of Protestantism was a mere local militia in comparison with the global reach of Catholicism. And the late scholastic Catholic theologians from Spain and Portugal in the 15th and 16th centuries helped develop what became the Church's teaching on universal human rights based on the fact that all human persons everywhere were made in the image of God. This has led the Church to support the development of international institutions such as the United Nations, even if their activities have been criticised in practice from time to time. Ultimately, as Pope John Paul II said in his message for the World Day of Peace in 2000, humanity, however, much marred by sin, hatred and violence, is called by God to be a single family. He then noted that globalisation, for all its risks, offers exceptional and promising opportunities to enabling humanity to become that single family built on the values of justice, equity and solidarity. But what about globalisation in the economic sense? Catholic social teaching documents have criticised the fact that so much poverty remains in the world, and they have often referred to rising inequality and sometimes rising poverty. Sometimes such documents have linked this to globalisation, but it is important to note that in the modern era of globalisation, in the last 30 years or so, more people have risen out of dire poverty than in the previous 6,000 years put together. And for the first time in history, there has been a meaningful reduction in inequality as people in poorer countries have become better off rapidly and in large numbers, whilst incomes in richer countries have stagnated, not least due to the ageing of populations in the developed world. Although there are a number of different factors that explain these trends, such as a reduction in the number of military conflicts and the growth in democracy, it is impossible to imagine this reduction in poverty and inequality happening without globalisation. Indeed, in his 1991 encyclical Centesimus Annus, John Paul II wrote, "Even in recent years it was thought that the poorest countries would develop by isolating themselves from the world markets and by depending only on their own resources. Recent experience has shown that countries which did this have suffered stagnation and recession, while the countries which experienced development were those which succeeded in taking part in the general interrelated economic activities at the international level." He then went on to urge rich countries to remove protectionist trade barriers against poor countries. There has been a change in these trends in recent years. The world is now growing more protectionist. Nations are showing more hostility towards the outsider, just when so many migrants need a safe haven. Conflicts are growing. International cooperation is on the wane. In the midst of this, we should not forget the gains, especially for the world's poorest, from the recent period of globalisation. Catholic social teaching is not just focused on material outcomes, however. Its view of economic life is a moral one. Pope Francis has urged us to ensure that business operates morally in all contexts. In global contexts, this is especially important given the growth of modern slavery and poor working conditions in supply chains. Pope Francis has also urged us to ensure that globalization does not lead to a kind of cultural colonization whereby Western secular values are imposed upon other nations. Pope Francis has also explained to us how migration, another aspect of globalization, can help promote entrepreneurial vibrancy and help cultures intermingle in a fruitful way. It is easy to think that this example trivializes the issue, but without globalization at various points in our history, there would be no potatoes, tomatoes, olive oil, coffee, chocolate, sugar, turkey, carrots, chicken and sweet corn in our shopping baskets in Britain. And what we might think of as the quintessential British takeaway food, fish and chips, owes its origins to the Americas, potatoes, Spain and Belgium, chips, Jewish immigration from Portugal and Spain via Holland, battered fish, and later immigration from Eastern Europe, the first fish and chip shop owner in the mid-19th century. But globalization can never be about economic gains alone. It must promote integral human development. Populists and many others in British society warn about us losing our rootedness, becoming citizens of nowhere. At the same time, we cannot ignore our call to, in our own situation, promote the global common good. Pope Francis summed up this tension and suggested how we might resolve it in his encyclical on social friendship, Fratelli Tutti, when he wrote, "It should be kept in mind that an innate tension exists between globalization and localization." We need to pay attention to the global, yet we also need to look to the local, which keeps our feet on the ground. Together, the two prevent us from falling into one of two extremes. In the first, people get caught up in an abstract, globalized universe. In the other, they turn into a museum of local folklore, a world apart, doomed to doing the same things over and over, incapable of being challenged by novelty or appreciating the beauty which God bestows beyond their borders. We need to have a global outlook to save ourselves from petty provincialism. This is a wonderful expression of how we should try to attain the gains from globalization without losing the deep fraternity characteristic of a local community.